robots are taking over. Are you cool with that?
Right, it's Terminator Judgment Day going on here.
Yeah, I am embracing our robot overlords. We're talking today about AI generated content, artificial intelligence. This is a really hot topic right now because AI generation is exploding right now, and there's all kinds of uses for it. People from journalists are using it to write content. People are creating images from it. Even it's really hot topic in the world of education because students are using this service to write papers, and teachers are dealing with that, and new types of opportunities for plagiarism. So, what do you think, Nick? What's your overall opinion of content generated by machines?
Well, before we go down that road, I think the first thing we really need to look at is the role that technology really plays into things, because this isn't like a new argument, for our generation. And, I want to take people back because there was a time when we were in school and the big technology that was introduced that we were not allowed to use was a calculator.
Shout out to the TI-83.
That's right. So this isn't something like new. It was like a really big deal. Like, hey, kids, you can't use a calculator. Like, you have to learn how to do math by hand. Then remember, if you use a calculator, you're cheating. And then the next thing that came after that was the WordPress with the spell checks. You can't use this. You got to learn how to spell on your own. So it's like this type of idea that machines are going to come in and take over for intellectual insights on things, or your ability to think for yourself, is not something new. And I think for us, it's really getting into a place of embracing that these technologies are going to come about, and this is the wave of the future. And eventually what's going to end up happening is, I think over time, people are going to end up going back. That maybe 10 years down the road from now, people are going to start going back to the old school way. Like, we're going to do things freestyle. We're going to do things by hand and create art. But for the time being, I really feel like it's important to start embracing this technology. And not only that, I just want to also take it a step further here. In our industry, I'm starting to see that there's a trend within the marketing community that our skill sets or jobs, or however you want to put it, are starting to go the way of our fathers with the working in warehouses, or doing like General Motors, right? Where you were able to start going into these companies and you didn't really need much education. You could get a really good job, just helping them with their assembly line. And then eventually they started sending all of these jobs overseas. Well, you're literally seeing the same thing happen in our industry, where before the AI, all of these jobs are actually starting to get done by India, some of these other, Malaysia, these other countries are actually starting to come in and do the jobs that here in the States we're doing. And now it's starting to even evolve more with the AI. So I think it's important that for us as marketers or, creatives, it's getting to a place where this stuff doesn't necessarily create all of it, but where you start learning how to manage the technology to make better creative work, better marketing, just better writing, all these type of things, So I wouldn't be scared of it replacing your job. I would just look at it and say, how can I use this to enhance what I do and be more efficient, but not necessarily do everything for me?
Yeah, you made a lot of great points right there. First one I want to go back to is just talking about history of technology. And it seems like every time a new technological innovation comes out, a lot of people, because we don't really know what this technology is capable of, we go to the worst case scenario. We take a look at what's happening in the short term and we extrapolate out to the long term, but that's always worst case scenario for many people. There's all kinds of technologies that we thought were going to destroy things. Okay. You brought up the calculator. Okay. If we just take the example of math, How many people need to know how to spit out 637 times 945 in a couple of seconds by hand? Is that really essential for a lot of professions? No. I think what's more important is that, yes, the kids are taught how to do that, but then how to use the calculator to get that answer faster so that they can use their time to learn other things. It's the same way we use Google. Okay. Do we really have to know everything? The answer is right there if you know the right search terms. Learn how to use the technology, and then it could save you time and free up your brain for other things. So when we're talking about, let's say, writing articles, if you have a marketing blog, if you're a journalist or something like that, and you need some facts, how can you use these tools to speed up your workflow without completely without completely putting your brain on autopilot? You know what I mean? I'll go to my experience with AI so far. So as you know, I've been dipping my toes into AI assisted writing lately for some of our articles. And in fact, we have one up on thebrandoutlaw.com right now, an intro to AI assisted writing. So after you listen to this episode, go to the website, check that out. You'll get a little primer on everything about like what it is and how you can get started with it, and even some of the ethical implications. And I tried out a few different services to write some of these articles. And the one I've settled on is Jasper, but it didn't do all the writing for me. Okay. I put in the prompts. I said some of the questions I wanted answered, and it spit out some paragraphs. They were coherent. They were pretty much grammatically correct. And they answered the questions thoroughly, but not in a way that was great for reading. Okay. So I had to go through and read every word, make sure it was written more in our voice, and also do a little fact checking just to make sure that it wasn't pulling any misinformation that it might have found on the internet. And I ran it through a plagiarism checker just to make sure it wasn't completely ripping off someone else's content. So I actually did have to do a lot of work to create these articles. Even though I was using this software, it didn't completely put my brain on autopilot. I was still able to think and be creative and find ways to take this starting point and bring it to an end point that is publishable. That's one thing I really want to make clear today for anybody who's afraid of AI writing. There are problems with it. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I do think it's a really good starting point if you take the mindset that that's all it is. You start with it, and then you have to do the work to refine it. There's going to be redundant text in it probably if it's a long form piece. So you're going to have to figure out what to cut out, and you've got to figure out how do you put it in your own voice. And so you're not taking away creativity.
And you still have to do some research on what type of topics you should focus on. And so I want to be clear to the audience, when it comes to marketing in particular, it's really about production. So if you're afraid of this type of software, I would actually jump on it, because here's the challenge that happens in our industry. There's just so many moving parts since the internet has exploded. I mean, just marketing online is just even in the last 2 years. I mean, it's just everybody's on it. Where before, some people would be like, I don't necessarily need it. People are still showing up at my store. Why do I need to be on Google? And then obviously when the pandemic hit, people realized how important it was to have an online presence. But the challenge that a lot of these companies have is that you really need a full team to do your marketing, because we'll just say like 10 years ago, you could get away with running one ad and that was in the yellow pages. But now, if you're really looking at the entirety of online, you're talking about Facebook ads, Instagram, LinkedIn, Google search. I mean, there's emails, content, white paper. You see, so you can already see just from a production standpoint, you need like 5, 6 people with their own discipline, because one of the misconceptions about marketing is that one person can do everything. And this is just not true. It's like, Because here's the thing, really good marketers specialize in one area. So Ryan Deese coined this term of a T-shaped marketer, where you just have a broad overview of everything, but then you have one vertical that you're really great at. And that really what makes a great marketer. So someone can really understand branding, but they're going to be really great at Google Ads. So so the problem that a lot of these businesses have is, like, if I'm a startup or even if I'm a company making, maybe 500,000 a year, I can't afford to have a full out team. So they're going to embrace these AI softwares because it speeds up production. It's the same thing like we talked about earlier, why these companies are outsourcing outside of the states to get help, because it costs so much now just for labor to do your marketing. So if you're someone that's afraid to really embrace this, what's going to end up happening to you is that you're going to be left behind, because you're going to start seeing more and more employers are going to be looking for people that know how to manage this stuff, because they're going to be looking for someone like you or I to come in there and say, well, can you manage all of the softwares that's going to create this stuff so we can get a lot of production out there? And because otherwise we just can't afford marketing. And we can't afford someone who really doesn't understand, like what you're talking about, like how to take this content and make it where it can actually be used for a marketing standpoint. Because here's the thing, it's like when you start using this AI, what you'll start seeing, there's a lot of redundancy to how they produce the content. It's like it will literally, you could say, hey, pick 5 reasons why you should start doing SEO for your business. And within those 5 reasons, they'll have some redundancy within each of those reasons. So you have to be able to go in there and, like you're talking about, edit it in a way that makes a lot of sense. But most importantly, you still have to put your expertise into this content. So it's not a set it or forget it type of thing. It is a way for you to create your first draft quickly, because that's all this is. I want to be very clear to our audience. If you use AI, it's a first draft. It's not a final draft. So you still got to get in there. But what it allows you to do is get over the hurdle of starting something, because that is the challenge for most people. I mean, you think about diets, you think about all this stuff. What's the challenge? Starting. It's not necessarily finishing or getting in the flow. It's really starting these things. And so it cuts down on people procrastinating. So if you're like in on these teams and someone's like, oh, we need a 500-word blog in 3 days. Well, a lot of times the person's going to wait until the 3rd day to write the blog. I mean, I know someone's out there like, that's not me. I do it on the first day. I'm not a procrastinator. Well, my experience, most people wait until the last minute to get things done. I mean,
that person's either a liar or just just goody two shoes. Get out of here.
Exactly. And so that speeds up the process.
Yeah, staring at the blank page sucks. We've all been there. You're just like, what am I going to write about? But if you have this software that's like, okay, this isn't great, but at least it's a start. Now you take it from here.
That's right.
I also want to bring up the point, like, people are like, okay, but it's skimming the internet for content that's already been created by other people, right? What are you going to do if you start with the blank page and you want to do everything yourself? You're going to go read articles online. If you're a real go-getter, you're getting books and flipping through those, and you're taking notes, and you're taking things that other people have written, you're compiling them, reorganizing them, and then you put them out in your own words. You're doing what the computers are doing. You're just doing it at a much slower rate. Okay? Now, yes, there are issues about copyright and plagiarism. You have to be careful of that. But I don't think we need to take such an absolutist view and forget the fact that most ideas that people put out there, they didn't come up with them themselves. You copy and paste, but then you mix things up. You remix, you put your own spin on things, and then that's when it becomes yours. So that's what you do with this content.
Absolutely. And I think when we were talking about earlier with schools, and I can I can see teachers right now like, please don't encourage our kids to do this. Please, for the love of God. Oh, Nick and Matt. Oh, you're corrupting the youth, right?
Bad influences.
Oh, if I was a teacher or these schools, what I would really focus on is not trying to fight the wave here, but focus on the ethical portion of all of this. Like, if you know these kids are going to do it, they're going to do it. I mean, there's just no stopping uh, this momentum that's happening. And there's no stopping kids when they get online. I mean, the access they have to stuff is just night and day compared to you and I when we were kids. This is just the reality of it. I mean, I remember as a child, it was like a big thing that I can like go online and look up stuff that was like inappropriate. I mean, before then it was like, oh man, this is magazines. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. But then when the internet came up, it was like me and my friends were just like sneaking, looking up online, like, oh my gosh, can you believe what we see, right? And it was just instant right then and there. And now it's like even more intense. So the reality is like this is what's going to happen. So as a teacher, as an educator, I would be really focused on like, don't allow this to overtake your mind. Let's focus on how do we do this ethically, because this isn't going away. This isn't going to stop. And so we have to find a way to encourage these kids and the next generation to do it in a way that can have a meaningful impact on the world. Because here's the reality is like once they graduate school, they're going to go to jobs, and guess what these jobs are going to ask them to do? Use this software. And they're going to be like, but I spent all this time, my teacher hammering me saying I can't use this. But now the only way that I can make a living is by using this. So you can already see the contradiction that's going to end up happening for a lot of these kids, because it's almost like, was all of this time in school, like, was I being lied to that this is such a bad thing, but yet that's what's required of me to use now that I'm an adult? So it's like we really have to start thinking about ways that we can start educating these kids to use this stuff properly.
Yeah, back to your calculator analogy. How many kids are going through their school years doing all their math by hand, and then they finally get a job as a CPA or whatever, and they're not expected to do that stuff by hand. They've got calculators. So let's not be afraid of this stuff. But let's talk about the ethical and legal implications of AI generated content too, because that is important. I feel like this technology is moving so fast, and a lot of times technology moves way faster than regulation can keep up with. Sometimes we're creating things and we're moving forward, not really asking if we should be doing this or what's the right way to do this. It's like we're in Jurassic Park here. We're creating dinosaurs without asking, do you think the dinosaurs might eat people? Nah, it'll be fine. So, I mean, at the very least, this is my opinion. I think at the very least, if someone is writing something with AI content, at least for the time being, until this really catches on and everybody's using it, maybe put a little disclosure somewhere in the article that says, written with AI assistance. I think there are people who are going to want to know, and there's going to be people who are going to be disappointed if they find out it was, and they were expecting that it wasn't. So for the time being, that's like the bare minimum you can do. And, I have no problem if I put an article on thebrandoutlaw.com and I used AI to get me started with that. I don't care. I'll let people know.
When I think of the AI, so the first thing that I would really consider when using it, if we were to look at the ethical standpoint, is like it shouldn't replace research. Like just because this stuff creates it and just populates it, like I wouldn't take it at its word. So if it's saying like, for example, if you put into the software like 5 products that will get me to lose weight the quickest, and it'll populate these 5 products, and you just take that at its word, then to me that's not being ethical, because you're going to be putting that online, and say your readers are reading it and they think that that's the truth, But then come to find out, if you had done your due diligence, maybe some of these products have had recalls, they've had health issues, et cetera, and you didn't even do your due diligence to make sure that what is being created here is actually real and authentic. I think is a big problem. So it's like these are things that I would think about from an ethical standpoint of just making sure that it doesn't replace that step of research.
Because that's another thing that people, especially young people, need to be taught anyway. And I know they are in many places, checking for reliable sources and evaluating what your source is. And so you have to realize that when AI is skimming all this content on the internet, and a lot of them do have safeguards in place and making sure that it's getting information from reliable sources, but you never know. And so it is on you to check those things. And you can't always just take the first source you see. You have to know, you have to be able to discern what's a relevant source and what's not. So that just goes into how we have to learn to engage with this program. Fact checking, verifying sources.
Here's what's interesting, Matt. The people that are really most upset about this are the creators. Here's an example. Say you went online and you bought a pre-made logo. Okay, if you are so like upset about AI creating that humans can create it, then why didn't you hire someone personally to create the logo for you? Why did you go and why did you go and buy a pre-designed logo, which by the way could have been created by AI software? Just FYI, people, okay? Most likely it's not somebody at home who handcrafted all these logo designs and put it on a website and said, hey, this is generic, everyone buy it. Not most likely it's a computer that generated these logos and you're buying it. So it's like, so my point is, I don't think it matters to people the way we think it does. Because if it was true, I would only get handcrafted items. I wouldn't get items that were made on an assembly line. I wouldn't like get my marketing from like pre-made stuff. I would only be getting it from someone that I knew, like, oh, you handcrafted my blog, you handcrafted my email. But that is not the case. A vast majority of people are buying things that a human never even developed. So this notion that the whole world should be outraged about this, it's like, well, the market actually says something different. Market says like people actually will buy this and use it. But for creators, I think underneath there's a fear that your job is going to be replaced. And I think in a lot of ways that's a valid concern. But at the same time, if you're someone who's a graphic designer, you're someone who creates a lot of art for these companies, this is actually, in my opinion, an opportunity for you to separate yourself. Because if you're creating designs that stand out, that will consistently beat these AIs, you're going to be in high demand. Because it's like, yeah, go ahead, get your AI. I promise you it's going to underperform than my stuff. And here's the results of my stuff. Every time I've ran a test against the AI, this AI created this ad for me. I created my own ad. Look how much better my ad did. Right? So go ahead and take the cheap way. But with me, you're always going to get better results. So I would just really encourage you to not go about this in a fear-based mentality. It really should be like, I am going to find ways to separate myself so that way people will constantly still come to me, even as new technology is being developed around me.
Yeah. So in terms of graphic design, obviously there's a lot of people who like to go the cheap route with their logo. Mm-hmm. And you get what you pay for. So yes, it is incumbent on designers to really start talking up themselves and their craft a lot more and making people see that what they do delivers better results. It costs a lot more, but the results are better. So first of all, let's say you're a logo designer, take a look at your portfolio and ask yourself, be honest. Does this look like it could have been created with AI? And then find ways to differentiate yourself from that. For one, try building out brand systems for clients. So the AI is not going to be as good. It might spit out the primary logo just fine. and give you something that works well. But is it going to pick out typefaces that work well with that? Is it going to pick out all the colors, like a color palette that's going to work well? Is it going to make secondary logos? Is it going to create, let's say, patterns that you can put on your wall or your vehicle wrap? Or is it going to give you that 360 experience of visual branding? I don't think it's there yet, but that's something that a human designer can do really well. And there's just so much more to it. If you don't want to go the cheap route and you want to work with someone, well, they're going to ask you questions that the software is not going to ask. They're going to ask you questions you would never think of asking, inputting into the software. You know, a good logo designer knows that stuff, and they need to put it on their portfolios. So if you're a graphic designer right now, take a look at your portfolio and don't just have logos on it. Like, each one should come with a case study, talk about the problems that you solved for that person, talk about how you built out a full brand system, show photos of it in action. Because if it just looks like a dribble page, well, that's not going to look very different from a logo generation page. Chris Doe from the future, he made a really good point. Someone asked him about AI and if this is going to be taking jobs away from graphic designers, and he had a really good perspective on it. He said, so many designers, they want to start at that level, but what do they want to do next? They want to be a creative director. Well, now's your chance to be a creative director. Just instead of directing humans, you're directing software. It's going to show your skills, your creativity to be able to put in the right inputs that deliver outputs that are absolutely amazing, that someone else could not do on their own. So embrace the technology and use it to elevate yourself from designer to creative director.
You know, I want to piggyback off Christo here. I think as a graphic designer or anyone who's creating these type of visuals for a brand, if you really want to start separating yourself, you really want to start overtaking the AIs, you have to become a strategist. It's like because that's what separates you. So if you're going to a company, and it's just like what we do. We first start with a strategy, and you're not going to get that with AI. And part of a strategy is doing it. So let me backtrack here. So for people out there who may be confused, a strategy is really by definition a theory, right? It's a theory that if I do this, that I can expect this result. It doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen, but one of the reasons that you're able to come up with this theory is by doing research around your strategy to see if it has a great chance of coming to fruition. And these AIs are not going to do that. And if you're not a strategist as a graphic designer, you're not going to be a creative director. Because you have to have some strategy behind what you're doing. Because then when these AIs create the art or whatever it is that it's creating, if it's not fitting within your strategy, you're going to know that right off the bat. And be like, nope, we need to redevelop this. We need to keep going until it meets the strategy that we're trying to hit. And for us, that's why it's important, that first step. We're going to sit down with the company and we're going to have this discovery period to really understand what your brand story is, who your target audience is, how you have been doing your communication, right? So that's all a part of the research phase. That's all a part of really understanding before a strategy is developed. And if you want to, and a normal graphic designer, if they don't do that, if they're just creating the graphics for maybe an ad, they're just creating the graphics for the website and things like that, that can actually be easily replaced with AI. And I know that might sound offensive to people, like, I can be easily replaced. Well, no, you can't. I'm not saying that you should be easily replaced, but in the minds of a business owner, that's how they think about things, unfortunately. And they're going to think, well, I could just have an AI create all these things. But if you're a strategist along with that, then now I'm going to promote you to a creative director because I know you're going to be creating strategy for the overall brand look and feel. And then now you're just using the AI to assist the strategy. So, so I'd really start encouraging other graphic designers and other marketers to really start understanding what strategy means. Because what I'm concerned with is myself as a strategist, that people really get planning and strategy confused with each other. Most people are like, I'm creating this strategic plan. Well, strategy and planning are two separate things, actually. And most people kind of blend them together. They're just like, oh, well, our strategy is we're gonna do like 5 posts a week on Facebook, and then we're gonna be on Instagram. Those are tactics. That's a plan. That's like, here's our strategy. We are gonna totally dominate mobile devices, right? And if we dominate mobile devices, then our theory is we are going to overtake our competition because nobody in our industry is totally concentrated on being on mobile devices. So how are we going to get there? How are we going to dominate it? So now let's come up with a plan, right? And these are what your directors will do. And this is why it's so important that you first understand that, because if you're falling into the plan section as an aspiring marketer or whatever it is that you're doing, that part is what is actually being outsourced to people. It's all of the planning part, all of the tactics. That's what people are going overseas for. That's what the AI is doing. But the AI is not actually replacing the first part, which is strategy. And it's not actually replacing execution, because the strategist is going to see all the planning, you created it, and then they're going to make sure that all of that stuff is being executed. So it's like, it's really important to start looking at your career in that type of mindset. And you're going to start noticing that you're going to get promoted more and you're going to be more valuable to an organization.
Absolutely. How can you make yourself a better option than AI so that the people employing you are going to say, we could go with AI, but we're not going to get the same quality. So it's worth it to pay this person. Make yourself indispensable.
Yeah. And like what you're saying, though, they still might say we need the AI, but we still need a person here to manage it, to make sure that it's getting the results that we want. Because here's the thing, like when you were talking about earlier, like going the cheap route with the logo. Okay, if you go and you buy these logos, and it's cool and all, I mean, I guess you can do that. The issue that I have with people taking that route, it will not take into account your brand story. I don't think people really understand. I realize that a logo is a symbol of a brand, but it actually is a part of the overall brand story that you're telling. It's the feelings and emotion that people are going to have about your brand. And if you're not spending time strategizing and really thinking about all of that, you can end up picking logos that doesn't tell your actual story. It actually gets people to think, oh, well, I thought you did this. I thought you were about this. I thought this is who you are, but your logo, it doesn't fit any of those things. And then what ends up happening, we see this with clients, they got to rebrand. And you really think about the brands that have been around for a long time. How often is Nike rebranded? How often is Coca-Cola rebranded? Often, I mean, dude, you can just go down the line with companies that have not rebranded, that have been around for hundreds of years. And you know why? Because they spent time at the very beginning being strategic and really thinking about what is the overall story that my brand is telling. And if you are a graphic designer or any of these marketers, even if you do Google Ads, even if you write content, you really have to start looking at yourself as a strategist and say, how do I come in and create content that's not only valuable for our customers, but fits within the brand story? And then from there, if they want you to use AI, because most likely companies are going to ask you to use it because they don't want to outsource all this other stuff and incur additional cost. But if you don't really understand how to develop a strategy, I'm afraid you're going to end up being replaceable.
I will say some things about image creation. Now, one thing I do like, some of these AIs, if they're good at it, they could drastically reduce or even eliminate the need to spend so much time on stock photo sites. I can't tell you how much time I have spent looking through stock photo sites and everything, it's either irrelevant or just corny, people with goofy expressions, women laughing while eating salad. That's such a cliche. It became a meme. Like, I think there's a whole website devoted to it. If you just Google women laughing while eating salad, it's astounding how many pictures of that you will see. I don't know why salad is so hilarious, but there's a lot of photos of it. But I've spent so much time, and I would say I've wasted so much time looking for the right image. But if you can type that into AI and type in exactly what you're looking for in the style that you're looking for, you can save yourself a ton of time. And that time that you spent searching for the picture, there's not a lot of creativity that happens in there. So again, you're not losing any of your creative muscles. You're saving time to be more creative. Now, at the same time, there are questions about, are they using work without the consent and without compensating people who created it? So if we're talking about stock photos, yeah, it's going to take a lot of images of things that photographers have shot or that illustrators have created, and it's going to put them together. And should those creators in some way be compensated or be able to opt out, or maybe even better, should there be an opt-in pool? Should there be some kind of system where if you want your work to be somewhat of a Creative Commons license deal, where anyone can use it if they're using AI, do you opt into that pool? Rather than what's going on right now, where it's just assuming anything on the internet is fair game. Some programs are saying, oh, you can opt out. Well, you never asked me to opt in. And there's actually, there's a lawsuit going on about that right now. And I have a feeling we're going to be seeing Supreme Court cases in the next few years having to do with AI, because there are a lot of copyright issues. So we do have to be careful with that. There's a lot of great uses, but regulation isn't even close to catching up to making sure that this technology is fair for everyone. But at the same time, I think right now, embrace it. Don't be scared. Don't go to the worst case scenario. I want to close on this point, and if you have anything to add, go ahead. But this is the final point I really want to make. When it comes to copyright issues, plagiarism, fact checking, once you publish it and your name is on it, that is your responsibility. You can't blame AI once you hit publish. So make sure you're doing that work.
No, I agree. And you said it earlier, just to add one more thing to what you're talking about. If you're using these AIs, like which you're saying, like, hey, instead of me spending all this time looking at Shutterstock, I'm going to go ahead and use this AI to create it. Again, we cannot harp on this enough. It's not a set it or forget it. You could have copyright issues if you just set it and forget it. And that's not being ethical. It's not meant to replace your brain. It's not meant to replace your talent. It is meant actually to spark your creativity. It's meant for you to use your expertise to recraft that stuff. So if you're seeing a graphic, just like yourself, you're going to say, okay, this is good. It's almost where I want it to be. But let me add this. Let me take this. Let me put this with it. Now it's done. Okay, here's this piece of content. Ooh, that's not correct. Let me take that out. Let me put this in. Let me readjust it. Then you're not going to have copyright issues. But if you just do set it or forget it, in my opinion, now we're talking about real ethical issues here. And so just please do not let this overtake your own abilities. Allow it to be something that speeds up your process, not take over your process.
I have a feeling we're going to be talking about AI a lot more in the future, because this has just barely begun. So great conversation, Nick. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where this technology leads us. It's going to be wild for quite a long time, I think.
I do have one harp, okay? I'm going to just have one harp here. Why is it that we have AI before we have the hoverboard? Okay?
Yep.
I mean, I was expecting Back to the Future hoverboards by this time. But what, we got AI writing before that. I mean, I have a beef with that. I feel like we should already have had the hoverboards. We should be having the flying cars. I feel like that should have been a priority first.
All we got was the Cubs winning the World Series. That was it.